2:47 a.m. The ER at St. Mary's Hospital in Chicago was busy as usual. Security guard Frank sat in the lobby, sipping coffee from his thermos. Then squealing tires outside. Doors slammed open. Three men carried in a fourth, bleeding badly. Frank set down his coffee. This wasn't a normal trauma. This was a gang war spilling inside. Welcome to Unseen Heroes. Before we begin this story of one night when a hospital became a battlefield, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe healers can also be warriors, hit that subscribe button. And if this story moves you, don't forget to like the video. It helps other people discover these hidden heroes walking among us. St. Mary's Hospital on Chicago's South Side had seen everything. Gunshot wounds, overdoses, gang violence. It all came through those automatic doors. Frank Kowalski had been watching those doors for 8 years, ever since his wife Margaret died, and he couldn't stand the empty house anymore. At 71, with white hair and a slight stoop from arthritis, Frank looked like what he was, a retiree pulling night shifts for something to do. He wore the blue security uniform loosely, badge crooked, flashlight that needed new batteries. The young doctors called him Pops. The nurses made sure he ate during his shifts. Nobody asked about the anchor tattoo on his forearm, or why he always knew which trauma rooms were occupied without checking, or why he positioned his chair to see all entrances simultaneously. Frank Kowalski, Hospital Corpsman First Class, United States Navy. 2 tours in Vietnam. Bronze Star with Combat V. Navy Commendation Medal. But that was 1969 to 1971. Ancient history. The bleeding man was Carlos Mendoza, 24, multiple GSWs to the torso. Frank recognized the type immediately. Drug deal gone bad. Rival gang retaliation. The 3 men carrying him wore Latin King's colors, tattoos crawling up their necks. "Where's the fucking doctor?" The biggest one shouted, semi-automatic visible under his jacket. Dr. Chen appeared, already in trauma mode. "Trauma Bay 3 now. Everyone else, clear the area." Frank stood slowly, hand on his radio. Not the panic button, not yet. He'd learned long ago that panic made things worse. He keyed his mic quietly. "Frank to base. We need Chicago PD at St. Mary's. Multiple armed individuals. No shots fired yet. Copy, Frank. Units en route. ETA 12 minutes. 12 minutes. In Vietnam, 12 minutes was a lifetime. The gang members followed Carlos into the trauma bay. Frank moved too? Not obviously, just an old man checking on the commotion. Through the door window, he saw Dr. Chen working frantically, 2 nurses assisting. One gang member held a gun openly now, watching the medical team. The other 2 had disappeared deeper into the hospital. "Hunting," Frank muttered. They were looking for someone. Maybe the rival who shot Carlos. Maybe a witness. He thought about the hospital layout. 4 floors. ER on ground level. ICU on 2. Pediatrics on 3. Oncology on 4. 300 beds, mostly full. Night shift meant minimal staff, maybe 40 people total. Plus visitors sleeping in chairs, homeless seeking warmth, patients who couldn't defend themselves. Frank made a decision. He couldn't wait for police. Moving with purpose now, he headed for the stairwell. First rule of combat medicine: protect the wounded. The gang members in the trauma bay were contained for now. Dr. Chen would keep them focused on saving Carlos. But the other 2, roaming the floors. Second floor ICU. Frank pushed through the doors to find chaos. One gunman had the nursing station surrounded. For nurses with hands up, patients on ventilators beeped steadily, oblivious to the danger. "Where's Miguel Ruiz?" the gunman demanded. "I know that Pendejo is here." The head nurse, Maria, spoke calmly. "Sir, I can't give out patient information dash." The gun swung toward her. Frank cleared his throat. "Room 217. Everyone turned. The old security guard stood in the doorway, looking harmless. "What?" the gunman said. "Miguel Ruiz. Room 217. Into the hall." Frank stepped closer, hands visible. "I'll show you." The gunman grabbed a young nurse, Amy, as insurance. "You try anything, old man, she dies." "Understood." Frank led them down the hallway, slow and steady. His mind cataloged. One hostile, one hostage, semi-automatic weapon, nervous trigger. At room 217, Frank stopped. He's sedated. Motorcycle accident yesterday. The gunman peered through the window at the patient inside, bandaged, unconscious, clearly not their target. Wrong Miguel Ruiz. This ain't him. There are 3 Miguel Ruizes in the hospital, Frank said calmly. Common name. Wanting to check the others. The gunman's frustration was building. Dangerous. Frank shifted slightly, putting himself between the gun and Nurse Amy. Old habits. Look, Frank said, I've been here 8 years. I know where everyone is. Let me help you find who you're looking for, then you can go. No trouble. Shut up. The gunman's hand was shaking now. Adrenaline dump. Amateur. Frank recognized the signs. In Vietnam, he'd seen scared kids with guns make fatal mistakes. Time to de-escalate. Son, he said quietly, I'm guessing Carlos is your brother. Or cousin. Family, right? The gunman's eyes flickered. My brother. Then you want to be with him? Not up here. Dr. Chen's the best trauma surgeon in Chicago. Let her work. Let go back down dash. An alarm blared. Someone had hit a panic button. The gunman spun, finger on trigger. Frank moved. Not the shuffle of a 71-year-old. This was muscle memory from fire-based triage stations where seconds meant lives. He swept Amy aside with his left arm while his right found the gunman's wrist. The weapon discharged into the ceiling as Frank used the shooter's momentum against him, a move learned not in security training but in field medical school. The gun clattered away. The gunman went down hard, Frank's knee in his back, hands secured with zip cuffs from his belt. You okay? He asked Amy. She nodded, shocked. Good. Call a code silver. Lock down the ICU. Nobody in or out. Frank retrieved the weapon, cleared it with practiced ease. Where's the other one? I don't know. Frank's radio crackled. Security to Frank. We have shots fired in pediatrics. Pediatrics. 3rd floor. Kids. Frank looked at Maria. Can you handle this? The head nurse was already on the phone with police. Go. Frank moved. Not running. His knees wouldn't take it, but that ground-eating pace he'd perfected humping through rice paddies with 60 pounds of medical gear. The service elevator was faster than stairs. As it rose, he checked the confiscated weapon. Full magazine, -1 round. Safety off. These kids had no training, just anger and desperation. 3rd floor. The pediatric ward was in lockdown mode. Doors sealed, lights dimmed. Frank could hear crying, children scared by alarms and shouting. At the nurse's station, he found chaos. The second gunman had 3 nurses corralled, demanding access to patient rooms. Check every room, he was screaming. Miguel's here somewhere. Behind the security glass of the station, Frank could see the ward clerk on the phone with police. Good. But those doors wouldn't hold forever if the gunman started shooting. Frank approached slowly, hands visible but ready. The gunman spotted him. You, open these doors. Can't, Frank said simply. Lockdown protocol. Only opens from inside during code silver. Then make them open it. Why don't you tell me what Miguel looks like? I'll check through the windows. The gunman described someone who clearly wasn't a pediatric patient. Adult male, gang tattoos. Wrong floor entirely. These idiots were searching blind. He's not up here, Frank said. This is the children's ward. Your Miguel sounds like he'd be in adult trauma. 1st floor. Don't lie to me. Frank saw it then. The gunman's pupils. Dilated. Sweating despite the cool hospital air. High on something. Unpredictable. Behind the glass, he caught the ward clerk's eye, made a subtle motion. She understood, began quietly moving the children in the nearest rooms to the far end of the ward. I'm not lying, Frank said. I've been checking this hospital for 8 years. Every room, every night. Your friend isn't here, but Carlos needs you downstairs. Carlos is dying. The gunman's voice cracked. They shot him 5 times. 5 times. Then be with him, Frank said gently. Your brother needs family right now, not revenge. For a moment, it looked like it might work. The gunman's weapon lowered slightly. Then police sirens wailed outside, growing louder. The gunman's face hardened. You called them. He raised the weapon toward the nurses. Frank didn't think, just acted. The fire extinguisher from the wall became a projectile, striking the gunman's shoulder. As he spun, Frank closed distance. They went down together, Frank taking the impact on his bad hip. Pain shot through him, but he held on. This one fought harder, younger, stronger, fueled by drugs and desperation. But Frank had wrestled Marines in triage tents, held down wounded soldiers in medevac choppers. He knew leverage, pressure points, the spots that made men quit. When hospital security arrived 30 seconds later, they found Frank sitting on the subdued gunman, slightly out of breath but calm. "Took you long enough," he said. By the time Chicago PD secured the hospital, Frank was back in the ER. The first gunman from Trauma Bay was in custody. Carlos was in surgery, DR. Chin still fighting to save him. Frank sat in his usual chair, giving his statement to a detective while an EMT checked his hip. "Just bruised," the EMT said. "You're lucky." Frank almost laughed. Lucky. In Vietnam, he'd pulled wounded Marines from burning helicopters, held pressure on arterial bleeds while taking mortar fire, performed emergency cricothyrotomies in spider holes. Tonight was nothing. Frank, DR. Chun appeared, blood on her scrubs. Carlos made it. He's critical but stable. Good work, document. She studied him with new eyes. That move you pulled upstairs. Where'd you learn that? Navy, Frank said simply. You were a SEAL? No, ma'am. Corpsman. We just patched up the SEALs when they got shot. Just, DR. Chun shook her head. Security footage shows you disarmed 2 armed men, protected my nurses, kept those kids safe. That's not just anything. Frank shrugged. Corpsman's job is to preserve life. Doesn't matter if it's a fire base in Nam or a hospital in Chicago. Same mission. The detective finished his notes. Mr. Kowalski, you probably saved a dozen lives tonight. That was impressive. That was Tuesday night in Chicago, Frank corrected. Now, if you're done, I've got rounds to finish. But he didn't get to finish rounds. By morning, the story had spread. 71-year-old security guard stops hospital takeover. Local news, then national. Everyone wanted to interview the Vietnam vet who protected an entire hospital. Frank refused them all. He was back the next night. Same chair, same thermos of coffee. The only change was the young nurses now looked at him differently. Not as Pops, the harmless old guard, but as someone who'd stood between them and death. Amy, the nurse from ICU, brought him cookies. My grandmother's recipe. It's thank you doesn't seem enough. You don't thank me, Frank said. You do your job. Save lives. That's thanks enough. Were you scared? Frank considered. Scared? No. Concerned? Yes. There's a difference. Fear paralyzes. Concern motivates. When you've held Marines' intestines in place during a firefight, some punk with a Saturday night special doesn't register as fear. Why security? With your skills, you could do so much more. Frank smiled. This is more. Every night, I watch over people at their most vulnerable. The sick, the dying, the newborn. In Vietnam, I protected Marines. Here, I protect everyone. Same mission, different uniform. Word spread through the hospital. Staff learned Frank's story in pieces. How he'd earned his Bronze Star defending a field hospital. How he'd saved over 200 lives in combat. How he'd come home to become an EMT, then a paramedic instructor, teaching the next generation until retirement. But Frank never talked about Margaret. How she died in the same hospital after 43 years of marriage. How he'd felt useless, unable to save the one person who mattered most. How working security let him stay close to her memory while still serving others. 3 months later, the hospital held its annual awards ceremony. Frank sat in the back, uncomfortable in the attention. When they called his name for the Civilian Service Award, he almost didn't go up. Frank Kowalski embodies everything ST. Mary stands for, the CEO said, dedication, compassion, and the courage to act when others might freeze. He reminds us that heroes don't always wear capes or carry stethoscopes. Sometimes they wear security uniforms and carry only the wisdom of service. Frank accepted the plaque, said a quiet thank you, and tried to escape. But the standing ovation followed him. Doctors, nurses, janitors, administrators, all on their feet for the old corpsman who'd never really left the service. Later, in the break room, Dr. Shin found him staring at the plaque. "Weird, getting medals for doing your job," he said. "Some jobs are more than jobs," she replied. "Some are callings." Frank thought about that. Thought about the 18-year-old who'd enlisted in 1968, terrified but determined. The corpsman who'd learned that healing and fighting were sometimes the same thing. The old man who'd found purpose in a plastic chair in a hospital lobby. "Doc," he said, "you ever wonder why some of us can't seem to retire properly?" "Because the mission never really ends," Dr. Chin said. "It just changes venues." Frank nodded. That was it exactly. He still works nights at St. Mary's, still sits in the same chair, drinks the same coffee. But now there's a small sign by the security desk, protected by Frank Kowalski, HM1 FMF USN Red. Most people don't know what those letters mean. But the ones who do, the other veterans, the active duty who pass through, they stop and shake his hand. Because they know, Hospital Corpsman First Class, Fleet Marine Force. A doc, someone who ran toward danger to save lives. The gang members were sentenced. Carlos survived, paralyzed but alive. He sent Frank a letter from prison, apologizing. Frank wrote back with 3 words, "Choose better, son." Because that's what corpsmen do. They heal, they protect, they guide. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the ER is slow, Frank tells the young security guard stories. Not about the heroics or the medals. About the mission. About service. About how a healer's hands can also be a warrior's when innocents are threatened. Remember, he tells them, we're not here to be heroes. We're here to make sure everyone goes home. That's the only mission that matters. So now I ask you, who watches over you in the night? Who stands guard while you heal, while you sleep, while you're vulnerable? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you know a guardian hiding in plain sight. Because at Unseen Heroes, we know that protectors come in all ages, all uniforms. Sometimes the ones who've already given everything are the ones still standing watch. Until next time, thank the security guard at your hospital. Look past the uniform and see the person. You might be looking at a warrior who never truly left the battlefield. They just found a new one to defend.